criminal organizations who are utilizing the weakness of the Biden strategy at the border and his both. We're going to talk about with Secretary Mike Pompeo, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, the ACLJ, about this idea that words matter.
This is what it looks like right now. If you're watching on any of our social media platforms or on TV, this is what it looks like.
They remove cages and put plastic wrap instead. Remember, these are the guys who built the initial cages, the Biden team. It was not the Trump team. And they're only supposed to be there 72 hours. They're staying for weeks plus.
Because there's nowhere for them to go.
It's an enormous humanitarian crisis. It's also a crisis for the United States, a national security crisis for the United States. I was very involved in working with the foreign minister in Mexico and Mexico's president and putting the humane policies in place that allowed the people in El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala to understand they weren't going to be able to come into the United States, that it wasn't going to happen, that they didn't have valid asylum claims. And yet this administration's gone the other direction. It's tragic to watch what's going on out there each day. It's going to get worse. The policies that we put in place, and it took us many, many months to get them in place, ought to be reinstated. If we do, there'll be a more humane policy with respect to immigration. We'll shut down these unlawful pathways, and we won't create the incentives to risk American sovereignty either.
Criminal organizations that are trafficking women, children, families, single adults, the drugs, everything that goes together. The traffickers themselves are earning as much as $14 million a day. Right. That was back in February. It's only gotten worse since February. So what does that number get to, $18 million a day? On top of that, the Biden administration is having to spend $86 million on a contract for hotel rooms to hold 1,200 migrant families as the crisis exceeds the holding capacity for ICE. So, we're spending considerable amount of money, and the bad guys are making a considerable amount of money.
This is the smuggling. I'm giving the smuggling revenue from February. $34 million for children coming out of Central America. This is answering Robert's question. Central American families, another $80.7 million. Central American single adults, $139 million. Individuals from Mexico alone, $157 million. Total February, $411,500,000. Fan, this is a crisis at the border, and it is taxing our resources, and it is putting children in harm's way.
This is going to make people cringe, but I think they need to hear it. Another thing that happens to these kids is they get what's called recycled, and that's such a crass word. But, Jay, essentially they're brought over the border as a free ticket into the country, and then the people that bring them disappear into the interior of the country. What happens to the kids? Jay, they're sent back to be brought over a second time, recycled, if you will, to be the admission ticket for another set of people.
About 2,200 children have been illegally crossing the border weekly in February. The government's projecting that about 9,000 children will be taken into custody by the end of February. So they're still going through those numbers. So somewhere close to 10,000 unaccompanied minors is what we're talking about in Robert. And I think it's only gotten worse from February to today.
These cartels that are trafficking these children are giving these parents all the benefits that these kids are going to pay. The medical, the education. Right. So that's part of the sales pitch. And again, we've got to, look, I've got to have compassion on the kids, and I do. So you got to figure that situation out. But that's what I was asking, Than. I've got our legislative team working to see. There's got to be a bipartisan solution to this situation. I mean, that's really what we're looking for here. What is the bipartisan response to this situation?
There isn't one is the problem. Because on the left, they want to legalize everybody and keep the border flowing because they think it's an easy Democrat vote. They would, but at the same time, they know that Republicans won't go for that. They don't have the votes for that. So instead, they just use it as a political issue. And that's what's the worst thing, is that these people get treated like political pawns ultimately by the left. It is by the left. They don't actually want immigration reform. They like to keep these people in the shadows, dangle it out as a partisan issue in election cycles, and then, not talk about it every few years.